The 4% rule is kind of like BMI as a measurement tool. It is generally accurate, but specifically wrong. Hey everyone, I'm Andrew. I'm the owner of Lever Wealth Management, which is the financial advisor for people who scare financial advisors. And I've spent the last several years helping ultra high net worth and high net worth investors with their complex financial lives. And what I do is I take the learnings from those thousands of iterations and I give them to you so that you can apply them to your own situation. And today I want to discuss if the 4% rule is still a worthwhile frame of reference for us to view retirement planning. The reason I start with that analogy is much like BMI can be a good snapshot at a point in time as a quick understanding of am I obese, am I not obese, so can the 4% rule of am I healthy or am I not healthy in a retirement aspect. However, I know several people, not myself, who are completely jacked and they would be told, hey, you have a very large or very high BMI, therefore you're not healthy, but they're in fact healthy. They're just carrying more muscle mass. And on the inverse, people who have a very low BMI sometimes are very unhealthy for various reasons, right? So you get the idea. Much the same, the 4% rule, which is I can withdraw on an inflation adjusted percentage, 4% of my investable assets for 30 years, isn't necessarily a prescriptive tool, but what it is good at is giving you a quick snapshot of am I in the right ballpark or not. I think of a client I had who was 55 and retired early. They were withdrawing about 10% a year at 55. And it was 401k money, so we were using the rule of 55. And 10% withdrawal rate, you would immediately go, wow, that's way too much. You're 55 years old, 10% withdrawal rate, your money might last 15 to 20 years if you have a good outcome in the investment markets. However, at 65, they had a defined benefit plan, a pension plan coming in. They had Social Security for themselves and they had Social Security for their spouse that would come in and take care of about $100,000 a year of expenses. And so at that point, they would only need to tap their IRAs or their 401ks for ancillary expenses over and above what's normal, which you can be much more judicious on how you spend those funds than your core expenses, right? So it was a 10% withdrawal rate, which is bad, but it was a 10% withdrawal rate for a 10-year period of time. And then after that period of time, it was close to a 0 to maybe 1.5% withdrawal rate, right? So these are very, very different percentages when you take into account the household allocation of net worth. And that's one of the issues that I see with the 4% rule is it needs to take into account all assets, not just investable assets. And many times our withdrawal rates are far more clunky than what we would give them credit for. Furthermore, when my man Bill was doing this research, he was just trying to figure out what's a safe withdrawal rate for my own practice and my own clients, because this research had not really been done at that point. And so he used 30 years. He used, various asset allocations have been run in the past, but 50-50, 60-40 stock to bond rates. We're going to inflation adjust it each year. But it is a rigid structure. And I don't even think his point so much was to say, this is prescriptively how everyone else should view it. It was, what is a base level that's okay for my clients? On the aggressive end of the spectrum, you can also run into different spending strategies that are dynamic in nature, such as guardrail spending, where you say, if my portfolio exceeds a certain return threshold, I'm going to give myself more than an inflationary bump. And if my portfolio decreases by a certain percentage, then I'm going to decrease my spending, right? So an example I like to use is if I have $1 million and it goes up to 1.2, that's outperformed my plan expectations. I'm going to give myself a 10% increase in my spend rate, and that's my new floor. And inversely, if my million goes down to 800,000, I'm going to decrease my spending by 10%. The problem with this strategy is everyone's fixed to variable expenses differs. And so I do think that naturally people tend to use a guardrail spending approach for their variable expenses. But we need to make sure in our retirement plans that we're not assuming your ability to decrease your spending patterns on all expenses at all times. Meaning, if you're only spending $50,000 a year and it's mostly property taxes and, healthcare costs, food, etc., there's not the ability to continually reduce your expenses versus somebody who's spending $200,000 a year and half of that's discretionary. On the other end of the spectrum, a 4% withdrawal strategy may be too aggressive if you're planning on retiring early. If you have a liquidity event, you're 45, you're 50 years old. Many times I'll run retirement plans at least to 95. Well, if you're healthy and you have longevity and where healthcare and health span is going, perhaps we run retirement plans out to 100. Well, if you're 45 years old, that's 55 years. The 4% rule is based on a 30-year time horizon, right? And every year of horizon that you add to a retirement plan, the sequence of returns risk is magnified because of the compounding effect. In addition to that, let's further walk down and say, perhaps you're not wanting to take much equity risk. Well, then your starting withdrawal rate has to change, because if you're not going to take the equity risk premium into account and you're only going to have fixed rate payouts like bond coupons, a safe withdrawal rate, depending on where interest rates are, may only be 2.5% to 3%. This is what happened really in 2017 through 2020, when most sovereign debt was actually negative. I believe at one point almost 80% of sovereign debt in the world was yielding negative interest rates. If that's the case, then a safe withdrawal rate cannot be 3 or 4%, right? And that's an extreme example, but I think you get my point here. All that to say, there is nuance in this. And let's make sure we're using this rule of thumb for what it's designed to do, which is to be a rule of thumb. Okay? Let's not use it prescriptively without thinking through and being mindful of our own situation. And we just carte blanche say, yep, 4%, that's good. No, it's an indicator of one specific thing within your retirement plan. If I've missed a nuance within the 4% withdrawal framework, or you have a specific question, this is why I've set up my AMA. Go to leverwealthmanagement.com/ask. Ask me any question you want about this. I'm an open book. I'm here to help. And you'll be signed up for my private monthly YouTube AMAs where I answer all of your direct questions. But the takeaway that I would love for you to have from this video is the 4% withdrawal rule bad? No. Is it handed down from God himself to us? No. It is a rule of thumb that can be used very quickly to help us understand, am I in the right ballpark or am I in crazy land here? And sometimes, even though the withdrawal rate looks really bad, like my client example there at the beginning, it could just be they have a specific one-off nuanced situation and they're actually fine. And on the other end of the spectrum, you could have someone with a lower withdrawal rate than 4% that actually has more risk than somebody that's at a 5 or 6% withdrawal rate, because difference in time horizon, different risk tolerances, all of these items play a part in whether your plan is truly risky. And I mean risky in the sense of dying with no money or dying with money. All of these have a part in helping you understand, is my plan truly risky or not? And the 4% rule is good to give you an idea of how much you can spend, but it is definitely not prescriptive for your situation. So until next time, thanks everyone.